Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world?
जिस प्रेस फ्रीडम इंडेक्स की इस पत्रकार ने बात की, उसकी फंडिंग भी जॉर्ज सोरोस के इसी एनजीओ से आती है.
You are a commentator, you've made a distinction, you're not a journalist. Commentary requires a certain amount of reading. How many books have you read on Indian democracy? How have you formed your opinion on India? And what's your studied opinion about the Indian political landscape?
So my empathy is with you that, you were kind of mistreated on air. You were asked how many books have you read on India? Have you traveled to India? Have you ever lived here? Do you know about yoga? What authority do you have to question our Prime Minister, etc., etc.? I'm not going to ask you any of those questions.
Of course, she was trying to make me look very stupid. Probably should have read up a little bit more about NDTV
Why did you decide to ask that critical question to Narendra Modi, or ask any question for that matter? But were you asked by George Soros to ask this question to Narendra Modi?
No, I have no contact with George Soros. I really don't have any ties to the Chinese government. If Xi Jinping came to Norway and they held a press briefing like they did on Monday, like Stöd and my Prime Minister Modi did on Monday, I would try to ask him a question too.
नमस्कार, इस खास कार्यक्रम में आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है. मैं हूं आरफा खानम शेरवानी. पिछले कई दिनों से लगातार दुनिया की एक पत्रकार जिनके बारे में हम बात कर रहे हैं, हम नहीं पूरी दुनिया बात कर रही है, भारत का पूरा मीडिया उनका चरित्र हनन करने पे उतारू है, वो हैं नॉर्वे की हेला लिन. जी हाँ, वो पत्रकार 28 साल की एक युवती जिसने दुनिया के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र के प्राइम मिनिस्टर को से एक सवाल पूछा और उस सवाल का जवाब नहीं दे पाई, और उसके बाद जब विदेश मंत्रालय उनके सामने पेश हुआ, उस विदेश मंत्रालय ने प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस के दौरान 15 मिनट का हमारे सचिव ने जवाब दिया, लेकिन उनके सवाल का जवाब नहीं दे पाए. आखिर क्या मायने हैं इस बात के कि 12 साल इस देश के प्रधानमंत्री रहने के बावजूद भी अपने देश में भी एक भी प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस नहीं की नरेंद्र मोदी ने? और ये सवाल उनसे किसने पूछा? मेरे जैसे गरीब मासूम पत्रकार जो हाशिए पे पड़े हुए हैं, जो बड़े नेटवर्क्स का हिस्सा नहीं हैं, हम तो पूछते रहे, लेकिन हमारी मदद करने के लिए एक और पत्रकार आई जिसका मैं जिक्र कर रही हूँ, हेला लिन. और उन पत्रकार ने सवाल वो पूछा जो देश की मीडिया को पूछना चाहिए था, तथाकथित जो दरबारी जेबी मीडिया है उसको पूछना चाहिए था. हेला लिन, पिछले कई दिनों से उनका क्या तजुर्बा रहा इस बात को लेकर, और क्यों उन्होंने नरेंद्र मोदी को चुना सवाल पूछने के लिए? क्या पहले भी वो ऐसा करती रही हैं दूसरे राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्षों के साथ? इन सवालों के जवाब देने के लिए हेला हमारे साथ खुद नॉर्वे से जुड़ गई हैं. और हेला लिन चूंकि सिर्फ अंग्रेजी में ही बात कर सकती हैं, इसलिए हमारे हिंदी के दर्शकों के लिए हमने पूरी तरीके से सबटाइटल्स हिंदी में आपके लिए लिखे हैं, तो आप बराए मेहरबानी इस इंटरव्यू को जरूर देखिए. ये इंटरव्यू बेहद अहम है भारत के लोकतंत्र, मानवाधिकार और साथ ही प्रेस की आज़ादी के लिहाज से कि अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर यह मुद्दा उठ रहा है. कैप्शंस के साथ इस इंटरव्यू के देखिए आप. अंग्रेजी में इंटरव्यू, लेकिन कैप्शंस आपको मिलेंगे हिंदी में. Hela, thank you very much for joining us this morning. My first question to you is going to be that I am observing and following your interviews with some of the pliant pro-government media channels here. Incidentally, in the earlier years of my career, I was also part of that network. That network used to be a much freer network. We could still speak truth to power. We could still question the government of the day. But since Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister, everything changed. So my empathy is with you that, you were kind of mistreated on air. You were asked how many books have you read on India? Have you traveled to India? Have you ever lived here? Do you know about yoga? What authority do you have to question our Prime Minister, etc., etc.? I'm not going to ask you any of those questions. My first question to you would be, why did you decide to ask that critical question to Narendra Modi, or ask any question for that matter to Narendra Modi?
At first, if it's okay with you, I'll just speak a little bit on the media events that have unfolded the last few days, especially that incident you're referring to. I'm very honest about the fact that I have a lot to learn about India. And also, I never mentioned curry. I said I loved Indian food and yoga, which was also kind of trying to tie it back to the conversation I had with the MEA on Monday, because he was mentioning yoga and all the great accomplishments of India. But yeah, it's been a wild media pressure the last few days, and I've been wanting to do as much of the media as I possibly have been able to press into my schedule, while also the Prime Minister was in Norway, and going on NDTV was one of them, and I don't regret going. But I also challenge the way the interview was conducted, because I think there were many good questions in the interview, and I'm very happy to have gotten so many critical questions. But where's those critical questions for the Prime Minister in India when the country is in a crisis when it comes to press freedom and human rights violations? And then I also acknowledge that I don't know what's going on inside that newsroom. There could be pressure. There could be a lot of tension. There might not be any freedom to ask those types of questions. So that's that's also why I appreciate being able to come on there, because even so we could lift press freedom, which was what I wanted to talk about and always tried to redirect the conversation back to. But of course, she was trying to make me look very stupid, and also there were some cuts of questions. But if that's her job, that's her job, and I respect that too.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying you said perhaps much more than what they ended up broadcasting?
I would like to see the full rough draft if I could, because I don't remember, because the conversation was kind of long. And I think I also, in hindsight, I think I should have done it. I could have done that interview today, for example. I would have waited a little bit, just because I haven't slept more than like 3 hours that night, because it was the day after everything went down, and it was crazy. So I think in hindsight, I should have been a little bit more prepared myself. That's on me, that I should have been prepared for the interview situation I was going into, and probably should have read up a little bit more about NDTV yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's your humility, but I think you were perfect, whatever you said. And I would give some concession to a young journalist who's just 20 years old. And I'm sure you are not 5, 6, you're
28,
just like
just so you know.
28 you are. And
Yes.
I think you are just 5 year old in the profession, right?
Yes.
So, Hela, two things. First of all, I think you're not saying that you were misrepresented. You are saying you were underslept and still you tried your best, but there were some parts of the interview which they decided not to publish. And you respect that, because that's the, privilege of the editor. That's in the editor's authority, that they might like.
They can do whatever they want with and focus on what they found most important. But for example, they started mentioning my newspaper and how it used to have ties to the Labour Party back in the 90s. I thought that was irrelevant. They also started bringing up names, but they, at least in the clips I've seen, they took out that they brought up the names, so then it just looks like I'm the one starting to talk about these names. So it's just one of those types of things where it's like, okay, well, I didn't have the need to talk about that because we separated from the party press. The party press ties were cut back in the 90s, so that's I can't answer for all that either, but what I will say about that, and what I said to that journalist, was that this is even with a party press back in the days, they were able to accomplish so much and also hold power accountable and create societal change. And some of the most prominent thinkers of Norway have worked in the newspaper that I work in. So, yeah.
So, Hela, my next question to you is that how has your experience been in the last few days after you tried to ask a question to Narendra Modi? Do you think it was a life-changing experience? Trending on Twitter India as well as globally, everybody trying to know who this young woman is and why is she asking that question to Narendra Modi. Also, there were accusations that you were actually sponsored and promoted by George Soros or the deep state or the people who do not like India, or you had anything against the Prime Minister. How did you respond to all these accusations?
Yeah, so first, of course, this has been a crazy experience for me, and I'm most of all thankful that the subject of press freedom was lifted, press freedom in India, that it was elevated to many newspapers around the world. Um, I'm also I also take the criticism. Of course, challenging one of the most powerful men in the world has a cost. So I recognize that if I were to go a week back, maybe, and have all the experiences I've had, maybe I would have tweaked some of my wordings or some of my reporting on Twitter. But all in all, I'm pretty satisfied with how it unfolded, and I don't think I would have done anything differently in like a dramatic way. But people call me dramatic though. So, but to your question, this is a very serious issue, and press freedom, when with one of the most powerful men in the world, as a journalist, when you're in Europe, especially, and we have someone like Prime Minister Modi come to our country, of course we should try to seek answers from him, because we have such a support here. We're very safe. When I walk on the streets in Oslo these days, no one thinks about this. So this is more in India, where it's much more polarized, and of course it is, because it's your country and you're having to follow the developments. But I just did something very small, and that was ask one question. It was a very small piece of journalism. It's you and your colleagues that are still reporting critically and trying to seek truth during very harsh and difficult conditions, where you're also actually risking your lives, that are doing the heavy lifting. So I just did my tiny, very tiny piece of a push. And then the story became about me instead of the subject, which was press freedom. But I would have been comfortable with it just being about a press freedom, and it being more like reporter pressed about press freedom. This is the situation in India. I do think that because I'm a young woman, it is easier to frame the story on me. Maybe if I was a male reporter, an older male reporter, it would have been more about the actual issue, but I can't change that. I didn't write the Who is Helleling stories. I still don't know who I am. I'm only 28.
So, Hella, you're saying that all you wanted to do was to actually bring back the press freedom issue into discussion, and I must congratulate you that you successfully were able to do that. I'm sorry for everything that you were, put through, and you're saying that this is a small price you paid to question one of the most powerful men in the world. You were subjected to this mistreatment primarily, or one of the reasons is because you are a young woman. If you were an old male with kind of gray hair, perhaps the treatment would have been different, and they would have thought that you had the power and authority to ask this question. But were you asked by George Soros to ask this question to Narendra Modi?
No, I have no contact with George Soros. I really don't have any ties to the Chinese government. If Xi Jinping came to Norway and they held a press briefing like they did on Monday, like Støre and my Prime Minister Modi did on Monday, I would try to ask him a question too, because there's a lot going on in China that is worrisome as well and alarming.
Oh, that's great. I think you have as much the right to question Indian Prime Minister or Chinese, Premier, as I have to question Norwegian Prime Minister or British Prime Minister or the President of the United States. So I think we should really give that to ourselves. My next question to you is that have you interviewed or tried to question other heads of states as well? What has been your previous record? और आगे बढ़ने से पहले एक अदना सी गुजारिश कि आप मेंबर बनिए मेरे चैनल का आरफा खानम शेरवानी। अगर आप मेंबर बनते हैं, आपके समर्थन से आप मेरा हाथ मजबूत करेंगे, इतना मजबूत कि मैं सत्ता का कॉलर पकड़ के सवाल पूछ सकूंगी और जो हमारे समुदाय में हाशिए के जो तबके हैं उनकी आवाज़ उठा सकूंगी। आप यकीन जानिए, आपका एक छोटा सा सहयोग मेरे लिए इतना बड़ा होगा जिसके लिए आप अंदाज़ा भी नहीं लगा सकते।
So I have mostly focused on Norwegian economy and Norwegian politics and consumer economy, especially. I've spent a lot of time on that. Stuff that you guys are looking at now, gas prices, and those types of issues are stuff that we also are very passionate about here in Norway. But I have followed my prime minister the last year and 2 months maybe. On this was my third like big state visit that I can remember, which and that I mean big in the sense that like it's an elevated person, not just a Nordic leader. Like it's different when Mette Fredriksen or Ulf Kristersson comes to Norway than when Prime Minister Modi comes to Norway. But I followed my prime minister to America to his visit to President Trump. And I also was in Brussels last year on his visit to the EU, and Ursula von der Leyen, his talks with the EU leader about the trade war. So I will say here's a little bit of a difference. I got to ask Trump about 2 to 3 questions when I was there. I did the same thing, shouting, Mr. President, Mr. President. I shouted a lot, and I got a few ones in, and that was good. But that was also a very available situation because President Trump will sit there for 45 minutes and take a bunch of questions. So also, I had another reporter this week that tried to take that and be like, why didn't you ask Trump about Black Lives Matter? And I'm trying to explain to this journalist from India that Trump takes questions almost every day. Trump also has press briefings every day. Black Lives Matter have been covered a lot in America. There's reporters on the ground and also in the White House that are able to question their officials and was also able to ask questions back in 2020 when this happened. I didn't need to ask Trump about Black Lives Matter. It happened 5 years ago, around 5 years ago from that time. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, my state visit, well, not state, sorry, when Stöde was visiting Ursula von der Leyen in the EU, she also took questions from reporters. She took questions, I think it was about 3 to 4 questions, not a lot. And she didn't, because I was, of course, trying to get a question in, but it was already set which reporters that would get questions in. And I don't control if I get a question in, but at least then the very powerful person, which was the EU leader, Ursula von der Leyen, in this case had the opportunity and was pressed on Norway and the EU's relationship and the trade war unfolding. So therefore, when she was I didn't feel the need to shout at her then because she did held herself accountable to to the free press. I'm sorry, my English is sometimes a little bit
No,
rusty.
that's fine. I understand. This is not even your first language. I'm saying that what I understand is that you don't have really particularly against just Mr. Modi. You did
No.
ask questions. You did actually ask questions to the most powerful man in the world, which is always the president of the United States. But then, I think probably when people were, asking you, why did you not ask questions on Black Lives Matter, which means the minorities, perhaps, or people of color in America, because you raised the issue of human rights in India. My question to you, although you've already, put your disclaimer that you don't know enough about India, but when you were given the opportunity, there were 2 things you particularly raised. One was the press freedom, another was the human rights issues, which is also the minority rights issues in India. Do you know anything about that? How did you come across about the declining human rights situation in India?
I've been reading international reports from Amnesty and also from the Human Rights Watch. And those are reports I trust. And I also read the news. So but I would say that the reason I'm not tapping into specific events happening in, for example, Kashmir, or specific incidents is because I do recognize that because India is such a large country, I would need to know a little bit more before I very much go into the situation, you know, and really that's also why I didn't, especially at the NDTV interview, I didn't feel the need to try to argument for every human rights violations because I would have been like slammed either way, you know. So I saw that as pointless to try to argue with or try to moderate the way she wanted to frame me. It was useless. But I recognize that I have a lot to learn, and I'm even more eager to learn after this week because I have noticed how valuable just that one question was to a huge part of the Indian population. And I want to learn more so that maybe next time in 42 years or so, another Indian prime minister comes to town, I can follow up.
Certainly. So, Hela, now the most important question for me of this interview would be that if you had another chance with Narendra Modi, or let's say if you were at all given a visa to travel to India and you, let's say, got an opportunity, an appointment to interview Narendra Modi, what are going to be your 3 questions that you would ask me? Question number 1, please.
Well, first and foremost, I would build on the question that I had. Why don't you take questions in a press conference setting in India? Why don't you hold yourself accountable to critical journalists that want to cover India in a truthful manner? That would be my first question.
And question number 2?
What are you doing to protect ethnic minorities in India?
Question number 3, please.
How will, well, my third question, because there would be a lot to tap into, and I think that I would probably elaborate on my, we would have to go back and forth, which I would try to do with the MEAs. And yeah, my third question, I would build on what I was talking to the MEAs. The Nordic countries, this is also why I thought it was important to try to challenge the Indian Prime Minister. The Nordic countries are now at that press conference on Tuesday, by all being there with the Prime Minister of India, lining up next to him, talking about how great our countries will flourish or how our countries will flourish together and how our economies will grow together. Why do you think you deserve the trust of these democracies when you're not yourself upholding the standards of a true democracy?
Hela Lynn, thank you very much. I'll leave it there. If there's anything else that you want to tell the people of India, if there is anything that you thought I should have asked, please feel free.
Oh, thank you so much for that opportunity. I would say that I so appreciate all the messages I see, and I'm gonna try. My problem on Instagram now is that I keep getting messages, and I want to start from the bottom so that the people that have waited the longest I reply first to, but it's impossible. So I'll soon have to maybe close my messages for a while just so I can get through each and every one. But I now want to take the attention away from me and what happened this week and direct it to the Indian journalists that are doing the heavy lifting in India and still seeking truth during times like these. We're living in crazy times. And I think it's very important to start focusing on the reporting from these journalists that are much more aware of the situation in their country. I pinned an article I found that have a lot of journalists named that I myself have followed and will look for their reporting wherever I can find it. And yeah, that's my encouragement. Let's try to lift these journalists now.
Thank you very much. I wish more power to you, and I wish and hope that any journalist sitting and working from anywhere in the world should have the freedom and opportunity to question the most powerful men and women who are running their countries on behalf of the people that they are serving. I hope people like you, journalists like you and me together can create that space for journalists who are feeling under pressure, who are feeling intimidated, who are feeling threatened, or those journalists who are serving, who are in jail right now or feel that there is a threat to their lives just
Yeah.
for doing their job.
Exactly. Yeah. Quick add-on. Yes, it's time for also Western journalists to show more solidarity with journalists that are working in much more difficult regions of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Hella. Thank you.